Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville politics, government, business, news, events, anything that gets our attention. My name is Jesse Mayshark. I am co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com, which covers all of the above, and I am joined once again by my fellow co-publisher and co-founder of Compass, Scott Barker. How are you doing, Scott?
Doing great, Jesse. How about yourself?
I'm fine. Here we are in December, huh?
We are in December, getting ready for the end of December holidays. We're recording this on Friday. The Christmas parade in Knoxville is this evening, and so things are getting a little festive.
Right. Holiday events all over the place. You got the Rocky Hill Christmas parade this weekend, and there's various other things on the calendar. There's the ice rink downtown.
And the Rocky Hill parade features producer extraordinaire Seth Barber
of Barbarian Productions.
Now, to be fair, it's not me or the studio or anything like that. I'm actually the coordinator for our Pack 251 of Cub Scouts for my kiddos. So that is the featured
you may be
float.
Incognito, Seth, but we know who you are, and we value you for it.
We have it on good authority because we're intrepid journalists. We have it on good authority that more people turn out for the Christmas parade in Rocky Hill to see you than to see Santa. I don't know. It's what our sources tell us.
Seth's a little bit of a Santa figure himself, really.
Well, yeah.
Sort of like a young Santa. If they made a movie. He's young Santa.
Young Santa.
I don't know if I should be insulted by like a Tim Allen reference right now or exactly what, but I appreciate it nonetheless.
Well, let's move on to the meat of this this podcast. Let's see. What do we have this week? We have an interview coming up with Mike Odom, the CEO of the Knoxville Chamber, talking about a new report they just put out this week. So we'll get to that. Some discussion of some pending bills in the state legislature that have angered LGBTQ advocates, both locally and at the state level. We'll be talking a little bit about that. A new agreement between the Knoxville Police Department and the Police Advisory and Review Committee for the first time in its 24-year history. We'll talk about that. And we're going to kick things off by talking about paid parental leave. So, Scott, you're a parent. I'm a parent. When your child was born, did you get any paid paternity leave?
I did not. I was in a weird employment circumstance we don't need to go into, but I did not get paid parental leave. It wasn't even on anyone's radar. Of course, that was 1992. So.
Right. Well, and so even somewhat later than that, when my kids were born in 2004 and 2008, I was working for the New York Times, which had good benefits, had a strong union contract. But, at that point, and I don't know if this is still true, but at that point, even the New York Times did not offer paid paternity leave. There was maternity leave for mothers, but the idea that fathers may also need to take some time off to acclimate themselves and their family and the household to the arrival of a new child, that wasn't really on the radar. However, Knox County government now is going to have 8 weeks of paid paternity or maternity leave for county employees. And this is just general government county employees, the departments that are under the mayor's office, Parks and Rec, the health department, libraries, engineering, public works, and so forth. And we wrote about this past week, but one of the things that's interesting to me about it is it actually makes Knox County government one of the most parent-friendly employers in the local public sector, period.
Yeah, that's, the progressive is not a term that you typically use to describe Knox County government. Especially
and Mayor Jacobs would probably prefer that we continue to not use the word progressive.
He probably would, but in the grand scheme of things, it is a progressive policy to recognize that not only mothers but new fathers could use some time to, like you said, acclimate themselves to becoming a parent.
Yeah. And of course, under federal law, we do have the Family Medical Leave Act, which mandates 12 weeks of leave, but all it requires is unpaid leave. So what it means is that if you have a child, you can take up to 12 weeks off without being fired, but they don't have to pay you. And most of our local, this is true in the private sector as well, but most of our local public sector employers handle that by allowing you to take that time, and then you can use any accumulated vacation time or sick time that you have toward that. But you don't get sort of like special designated leave. Now, this county benefit is actually a separate benefit that it just gives you 8 weeks of parental leave that then after that is up, you still have your vacation time or sick time or whatever that you can use to make up the rest of that 12 to 16 weeks. But right up front, you get that 8 weeks. And we should note that this is for both, if you have a child, or if you adopt a child, or even if you have a foster placement, a new foster placement for a child. Because, of course, in any of those situations, you suddenly have a whole lot more responsibility. As anybody who has been through any of those experiences knows, you have a whole lot more responsibility. Your daily lives are just completely upended. And also, boy, you're really tired.
Oh, boy, are you tired. I don't think that I've ever been more exhausted than I was the first few days of parenthood. That was it was an amazing time, but it was an exhausting time as well.
It really is. And so this policy, Jacob said. So interestingly, the county's benefits coordinator manager, Stephanie Candler, said that this was initially raised a couple of years ago by County Commission Chair Courtney Durrett, just kind of in conversation that she thought this was something the county should look at as a benefit for its employees. And so her department ran the numbers, and then this year Mayor Jacobs came back and said, yeah, let's go ahead and offer this. And part of the reason is that their estimate is it's going to maybe cost the county about $350,000 a year. And that's basically estimating that there would be 50 events, whether a birth or an adoption, for county employees at an average cost of about $7,000 for the 8 weeks that they would be off. And that is a very tiny part of the county budget. For the departments that are covered by this, I ran the numbers, it was under 1/5 of 1% of their total annual budget.
And it's also money that if they didn't get the leave, they would get paid because they would be there.
Right.
So it's really, that's lost productivity.
It's lost productivity. And then if they have to, depending on the role that somebody's in, I mean, there probably are people who can leave and their coworkers can sort of cover for them. But, they might have to have people work overtime or even in some cases bring in a temp worker or something.
Yeah.
But they felt like it's very affordable. They can absorb it within their existing budget. And it doesn't apply directly to any of the other county offices because every county office that has its own elected office holder sets their own benefits policies. But a lot of them have kind of jumped on board with this. The county clerk's office is doing it. All of the court clerk's offices, except for Chancery Court, I think, are now offering this. Now, notably, the sheriff's department, the sheriff's office is not. They have kind of the policy we were talking about before, where yes, you get those 12 weeks of leave, but they're not paid. And I believe that the concern there, we know the sheriff's office is understaffed as it is, particularly in the jails, their corrections officers. And I think their concern is anything that sort of makes it more likely that people are going to be absent for a long period of time is just going to make it that much harder to actually have enough people to do the jobs there. The school system also does not have designated parental leave. They have the same sort of arrangement where you can use your vacation time or sick time, and the city of Knoxville as well, which I think in a lot of instances we think of, the city of Knoxville has been in recent years often kind of the first of our local government entities to introduce benefits, but not in this case.
No, not in this case. And one thing that's important to note is that because the sheriff's office and the school system don't have the same policy, the vast majority of county employees in the big picture don't get it.
Right. Well, because
this is a very small number.
Yeah, it's about
relatively
1,000 employees under the mayor's office, and then another couple of hundred between those other offices. Versus about another 1,000 in the sheriff's office, and then about 8,000 in the school system. So, right, it still only applies to this one group. But it'll be interesting to see if, for example, when the city budget comes around next year, if maybe some either people in the administration or members of city council say, hey, we're all trying to be competitive employers here, and everybody's having a little bit of trouble attracting and keeping talent. Is this something we should look at? So anyway, that was an interesting move. Another interesting move involving another local entity, the Knoxville Police Department. What was the announcement that came out this week?
Okay, on Thursday, the police department and the Police Advisory Review Committee, which is kind of the civilian oversight board, announced that they had reached an agreement about how they would interact with one another. What's kind of odd about this, and no one had really thought about it before, is that the Police Advisory and Review Committee, PARC, has been around for 24 years, and there's never been a formal agreement on how they would conduct oversight with KPD and what the responsibilities of both entities were, and that's what this agreement does. It kind of sets the ground rules for sharing information and so forth. This is one thing that Chief Paul Noel told me Thursday was the one of the first calls that he made when he was announced as chief. Before he even started, when he was announced as chief, one of the first calls he made, was to Tiffany Davidson, the head of PARC, and he wanted to include PARC more in what KPD does. In fact, this agreement basically gives PARC more access to KPD information. They'll have, for the first time, access to KPD's internal affairs database. There are restrictions on the types of information they get. There's some documents that will be that are protected by state law. They can't be shared and so forth. But they will have access to those. They'll have access. They'll know who in the internal affairs unit is investigating. In certain cases, they will also be able, for the first time, to go into pre-disciplinary hearings as observers and watch it. And one of the things that
and these are actual hearings for officers.
These are for officers who are under investigation for internal affairs, for policy violations and so forth. And they will be able to go in and observe. They can't participate. They can observe. And Chief Noel had said that he thought it was very important that that PARC members or PARC staff could see the process firsthand, and that goes for both the documents and the hearings, and kind of see how the sausage is made. Because right now, or up until now, they just got the results. They didn't get all the background information in real time. They also expanded a little bit the ways you can report police misconduct, which is a lot of what Park does.
And you can file a complaint directly with Park, right?
Yes, the Park reviews two things. They review internal affairs investigations that are started by the police department, and they also field complaints, pass those on to the police department, and they field all kinds of complaints from citizens. And one of the things is it's kind of expanded what they're going to be doing. They can now take anonymous complaints. Mm-hmm. They can take complaints from third parties.
So if somebody witnessed something and wants to file a complaint about it,
they can file a complaint. Or if someone saw something and for whatever reason didn't want to publicly come forward, they could go to a community organization, tell them the community organization can report it on their behalf, and Park will look into it. And another thing is mediation to resolve some of the minor complaints. And there are a lot of minor complaints. I mean, you think of police misconduct and you think excessive force and things like that.
Corruption,
and those things are, unfortunately happen, and they do get investigated. But a lot of the complaints that come into Park are for basically courtesy issues.
Right. The vast majority, isn't it more than 95% or something?
Well,
complaints are
not 95% of all complaints, but about 95% of the complaints that aren't serious involve things like, an officer being rude and dismissive and things like that, and what they're really going to be pushing is using mediation to resolve those instead of taking up the time of the police department or in Park. Just go ahead and
bringing parties together and saying, let's talk about what happened and maybe reach a resolution at that level.
And mediation's been offered in the past, but this agreement basically puts a greater emphasis on it.
It kind of commits them to
it. Basically, if you go to Park and you say, Officer Smith was rude to me, and he, whatever he did, whatever Officer Smith did, or they claim he did, and it's not, like I said, it's not, excessive use of force or anything like that. It was just being rude, and instead of going through the whole investigative thing, bring you in. It's voluntary, but bring you in. And you can mediate, I'm sure they would bring the officer in, and you kind of mediate the dispute and come up to a resolution. So,
Well, and I think it's interesting that, of course, Park, when it was first created in the late 90s by former Mayor Victor Ashe, was very controversial with the police department, and even with City Council at first kind of resisted it. And then City Council did end up writing an ordinance and actually creating it formally. But I think over time, what I have heard some former police chiefs at KPD say is that they have found Park actually helps them because it does provide, well, I think one reason they think it helps them is that overall, Park affirms most of what when KPD does their own investigations and submits them to Park almost always, not always, but almost always signs off on them and says, yes, this looks like it was thorough and well done. But it kind of provides the department with an extra layer of review, but then also of protection in a way, because ultimately it's not just their word, it's also the word of this independent committee saying, yes, we've looked at it and we think it's okay.
Yeah, it gives them, when Park agrees with them, it gives them some confirmation of that. And one of the other things that Park does is, during their meetings, they'll go through the various cases that have come before them. Either most of them are internal affairs investigations, and they will grill the police department representatives on, what's going on in these particular cases. That's one of the reasons I think that Noel wants them to be in on the front end so they can see, how things work. But they're not. They haven't been a rubber stamp. They ask some really, really pointed questions, and it gives the police department an opportunity to explain their policies and procedures and so on. And whether you like them or not, whether you think it's appropriate or not, it does it does shed some light on that, because a lot of times actions of police officers are inscrutable to ordinary citizens, and they don't realize that there are that there's training and procedures involved for a reason. And one of the things that is, if there is a shooting and someone is the police are on the scene, they have to secure the scene before letting anybody render aid. And that's and now that you kind of think, well, the first thing you ought to do is rush and help the person who's wounded, but their responsibility is to ensure the safety of everyone else at the scene first before doing that.
Make sure it's not still an active
make sure
scene.
it's not still an active scene. And the park process, they have quarterly meetings. It gives them an opportunity to explain that. One of the other things in this agreement too, that's really not earth-shattering and new, but the KPD is going to make sure that park members and park staff can go through the Citizens Police Academy, can go on virtually unlimited ride-alongs with police officers and those kinds of things, to see what the police officers do and how the policies that you can read apply on the streets.
Right, in real life.
Yeah.
All right, well, an interesting move by the new chief. Okay, moving on from one kind of law and order to another kind of law, at least. There are a couple of bills that have been proposed ahead of the upcoming legislative session that revolve around the LGBTQ community. This is not a new thing for our state legislature. I can't remember the last time we had a legislative session that did not have some bills revolving around, or maybe it's more accurate to say aimed at, the LGBTQ community. This year's first couple out of the gate have to do with some issues that we've talked about here before, concerns about gender-affirming care, especially surgeries or medication care being given to transgender minors, people under the age of 18. And as we talked about a little while ago, anti-transgender activist Matt Walsh, who is now making his home in Nashville, made a big issue out of a pediatric transgender clinic at Vanderbilt University Hospital Medical Center. And the legislature has now proposed, and these are proposed by high-level Republicans. Senate Majority Leader Jack Johnson has proposed a couple of bills. One would essentially make it illegal to provide medical gender-affirming treatment to people under the age of 18. And then another one is aimed at drag shows and basically saying children can't attend them. That bill's a bit odd because it's essentially taking the state's existing adult-oriented businesses law, which applies to strip clubs and burlesque shows and things like that, and it just kind of throws male and female impersonators into that mix. And it does say in shows aimed at a prurient interest, but if you listen to the sort of popular dialogue around this on social media and elsewhere, especially sort of in the spaces of the cultural right, they're not differentiating between drag shows that have a prurient interest, which I guess would be a raunchy drag show where maybe somebody in drag is either stripping or otherwise being sexually suggestive, and a drag performance that is not sexually suggestive. It just kind of seems to assume that all drag performances are inherently sexual. And of course, one thing that makes me wonder is if the people writing and advocating for these bills have ever seen a drag performance. I have seen many drag performances, both at gay clubs, which is, of course, where they really have been nurtured as a kind of theatrical form, and then out in the wild. I was at a bar on Sevier Avenue, a family-friendly, open-to-all bar a few months ago, And it turned out there was a drag show booked there that night, and so we hung out. It was a good time. And in a lot of the shows that I've seen, people, they have costumes, drag performers have, personas. They have drag names that they go by, and they come out, and often it has to do with lip syncing and dancing to a song. There are people who actually sing themselves. There are drag performers who are also very good singers. But while they can be bawdy, there's no there's no requirement in the form of drag itself that the performance be actually sexual.
Yeah, and many drag performances are humorous and comical and kind of campy.
Exactly.
That's the whole point.
Yeah, and maybe kind of doing an over the top rendition of like a Celine Dion song or something like that.
Yeah.
But so anyway, these bills have been introduced, and we talked this week to local LGBTQ advocates at Knox Pride, and then also the folks at the Tennessee Equality Project, which is kind of the state's leading LGBTQ advocacy group, and just kind of wanted to get a read on their, as we expected, they are very much opposed to these bills. The Tennessee Equality Project has labeled them the slate of hate, which is a name that they've been using for the past several years to describe, sort of any bills that they perceive as being anti-LGBTQ in various ways. And they are gearing up to lobby against them, of course. But one thing that was interesting to me, because of course we also just a few weeks ago had the terrible shooting and murders at Club Q in Colorado Springs, and after those shootings, a lot of people, especially LGBTQ advocates, came out and pointed the finger at kind of people on the right, on sort of culture warriors, saying, you're the ones who have kind of stirred up hatred with this talk of trans people or drag queens being quote unquote groomers, being child predators somehow, which we should note, there is zero data to support any notion that LGBTQ people, whether they're gay, lesbian, trans, and or drag performers, are in any way more prone to be child predators than any other segment of society. In fact, I think there's data showing that it's actually less. And of course, as we know, the vast majority of actual child abuse and child sex abuse in particular happens within families, it happens within communities, it happens at churches, it happens in Boy Scout troops. There's just no evidence that there's any of this that is derived from, people going to a drag brunch or from people just kind of being trans people themselves. And so, they're pushing back against that. But what really struck me talking to them was a kind of determination, even after that Club Q shooting, which of course made everybody think about how vulnerable any space might be to somebody with a gun coming in. As Chris Sanders, the executive director of Tennessee Equality Project, said, I don't see us backing down. I think there's a sense, especially after the Obergefell decision in 2015 that affirmed marriage rights, essentially, that, it took decades, essentially, of work and advocacy by the LGBTQ community to achieve the level of recognition that they have achieved, which, of course, is still, from their view, very much incomplete. There are a lot of cases in which they are not protected from discrimination. But that having reached that, they're not going to back down just because they are, the designated sort of center of moral panic for this political season or for some particular political movement. And, that said, I think that given the makeup of our legislature, it's probably more likely than not that some of these bills at least get passed. Because they have passed several other bills in recent years.
When the majority leader in a House that has a supermajority proposes a bill, it tends to pass.
And Governor Lee has also signaled support for these. So there's a reasonable chance they'll pass, but I think there will be a lot of pushback against them and a lot of discussion. And one thing that John Camp, who's the board president of Knox Pride, said is that he really hopes, I mean, he said, yes, the LGBTQ community is going to be organized, is going to be kind of pushing back against this. But he also hopes to see more of that coming from what you would call sort of their mainstream allies. And, in recent years, in the past 10 years, say, in at least the state's biggest cities, a lot of public figures have also publicly embraced LGBTQ rights. When we have Pride Fest here every year, at least for the past couple of administrations, the city mayors have typically been there. Several city council members often come and kind of show support. And what John Camp said was, that's great. They love to have people out at Pride Fest, but the place where he said that support really matters and counts is in kind of like the halls of government, in the halls of actual power. And so he said he's hoping, and I think they're going to try to bring some friendly pressure on people they consider allies to maybe step up and be a little more vocal than they have in the past.
Well, one thing too that's kind of interesting is to kind of back up big picture thing, and this is one thing that pundits and observers have noticed for a long time. Well, I say a long time, for the last few years, has been the dramatic change in public perception of the LGBTQ community and the rights that should be afforded the community. And it wasn't so long ago that the vast majority of Americans thought that marriage equality, for example, should never happen.
Yep.
And now it's the exact opposite.
Right.
And it's only been like 10, 15 years.
And even in Tennessee, the most recent survey that I found showed that a majority, I mean, it was under 60%, but over 50% of Tennesseans believed that marriage equality should be a legal right. Despite that, we still have bills introduced, despite both that and the Obergefell ruling, we still have bills introduced in the legislature almost every year trying to erode that again and chip away at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I brought that up because the one thing that mentioned is that Camp said that the support really needs to be in the halls of power. Mm-hmm. Well, in a democracy, that's where the public perception, the public polling, could end up having a inroads in who gets elected. I mean, you'd think that it would. And
then on the issues or priorities that those legislators set once they're there.
Yeah, in a big picture, long-term sense, that is while I'm sure, that like any other advocacy groups, they would want to fight the battles here and now. But that should also be encouraging for them, given the long-term trends.
Yep.
That eventually, maybe these bills would not be popping up.
Well, and that was one thing that Chris Sanders at the Equality Project said, was that he thinks these bills are very much a reaction to the growing acceptance and visibility of LGBTQ communities across the state. He noted that there are now annual Pride celebrations, not just in the 4 big cities, but also in Blount County, in Murfreesboro, Pulaski, Tennessee, little Pulaski, Tennessee, down there in South Central, where of course now we also have a University of Tennessee campus, which was, I believe, the hometown of the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah,
right?
it was where the Klan was founded. So it was, it's kind of an interesting thing that they have
a Pride celebration.
And that's, of course, the people of Pulaski now have nothing to do with the people that founded the Klan in Pulaski.
But the fact that I think that some of the more rural legislators are even seeing this in their districts, and that is prompting them in some cases to react against it, because they're not necessarily used to seeing it. It's not a normal thing for them to go downtown and there's rainbow flags everywhere or whatever. Right. Why anybody exactly would be bothered by going downtown and seeing a lot of rainbow flags, I think that gets into people's personal belief systems and everything. But that was part of Chris Sanders' point, was that the pushback that they're getting is, in fact, in a lot of ways, a result of the progress that they've seen and so forth. And so in that sense, this is probably something we're going to see play out over the next many years, and this will not be the last legislative session where we will be talking about these kinds of bills.
Nope.
Okay, let's talk business. The Knoxville Chamber came out with an interesting report this week, and we have an interview with Mike Odom from the Chamber to talk about it, but why don't you set that up for us?
Yeah, the Chamber is concerned about the economy, the local economy. Basically, the premise behind this whole report is that Knoxville and Knox County have a great base in TVA, the University of Tennessee, Oak Ridge National Lab, the Y-12 nuclear weapons plant, all these large government institutions that basically kind of insulate the economy from the worst effects of recessions.
Because those institutions, while they might tighten their belts during recessions, they don't have the kind of mass layoffs or bankruptcies that private companies can.
Yeah, they're going to stay in business. And they're going to still. When we say they might tighten their belts, that means they might not hire extra people, but they're not going to lay people off in big numbers anyway, and things like that. But one of the things that's a little peculiar is that in good economic times, Knoxville doesn't grow as fast as other communities do, and by many measures, and that's a big concern because the people in the business forecasting world are looking forward to what they're calling the imagination age, which is where you take the what we've gleaned from the information age of the last 50, 75 years and really apply them. And huge changes are on the horizon in transportation and all kinds of areas.
Artificial intelligence,
things like that. Anyway, the Chamber has come up with a strategy to try to get Knoxville's economy in position to grow faster in good times and meet the challenges of the imagination economy. And it's a kind of a four-pronged approach to trying to attract or retain, because we have a lot of these businesses, high growth businesses. In especially the high tech areas, we get a lot of that because of ORNL and UT. There are a lot of startup companies here that are tech oriented. Retaining them, attracting new ones, that's going to be their focus. There will be probably a little bit less of a focus on kind of traditional.
Kind of getting somebody's auxiliary office that might have 50 people in it or something like that.
Right. I won't say that'll turn it down. But that's not going to be their focus is on these jobs. The other part of it, and most of this, and the rest of it, is basically about people. They are saying that we need to improve the quality of the workforce. We need to have more electrical engineers, more IT people, more people who can get those high wage jobs from high growth companies. And quite frankly, we don't have that. And even though we have the state's flagship university here, we don't have enough of those graduates to fill the jobs that are in companies here, much less attract new ones.
There was the interesting example with Pilot, right?
Pilot was, Pilot, of course, is a homegrown company, headquartered here in Knoxville. People can travel on I-40, see their headquarters up, looming over I-40 at Paper Mill Road exit. But the Pilot was going to establish a technology center because people think of Pilot as being a gas station, but no, it's a huge logistics company as well, and they require a lot of technical know-how, and so they were going to build this center They didn't build it in Knoxville. They built it in Atlanta, where there is a much larger pool of those talented people to draw from. Even though in the press release that they announced it, or the press release, they didn't really trumpet it a whole lot. They had it on a blog posting on their company site that it was an extension of their headquarters, which is Knoxville, which is 200 miles away from Roswell, Georgia.
It's quite an extension.
Yeah, it's a real broad definition of where your headquarters is located. But and that's not criticizing pilot. They're going to where the talent is,
right? And
that's what companies do. And so the Chamber's focus is we need to get more talent so they'll come here or expand here. That was a really good example because that's a company that was here and
wanted to expand, and quite frankly probably would have expanded here had they thought they would be able to fill the job.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the things that Mike will bring up is we don't have enough people to fill the jobs that are open now. Regardless of expansions. The other thing that has to do with people's entrepreneurs. Want to nurture entrepreneurs. One of the big stumbling blocks here is access to capital. People, we don't have a lot of these people with hundreds of millions of dollars lying around waiting to invest in the latest technology homegrown here in Knoxville. So getting access to capital is a big thing, and nurturing entrepreneurs who can create those high growth jobs.
Right.
That's another. The last thing has to do with, again with the workforce, and it's a term that I'm already tired of. But it's civic furniture, and one of the key issues that they have is Knoxville's demographic of 25 to 54 year olds, which is those are the people who are buying houses, starting families, investing.
And it's your prime working age population.
Knoxville's only grew 3.3% in the last 10 years. The other cities are growing much faster. Raleigh's grew 20%. Chattanooga's grew 8.8%. Nashville's 14.4%. So all of these other cities are attracting, basically working age family people, and Knoxville isn't. And the idea is to create more civic furniture, which are amenities that people in that age group will find necessary and attractive to live here. And the thing that they always like to say is, we've got a nice house, we need nice furniture now. And this can be anything from small things like the mix of restaurants, nightlife, cultural opportunities. The big piece of furniture that they're working on now is the stadium, the multi-use stadium. The urban wilderness is a
outdoor recreation.
Outdoor recreation
push.
And one of the things is that's kind of interesting about that is the things that have been that you point to as civic furniture in Knoxville are the things that are basically homegrown. The urban wilderness was, the Appalachian Mountain Bike Club looked down. They wanted a great place to ride bikes, and they figured out how to work with the Legacy Parks Foundation in the city to take undeveloped land in South Knoxville and turn it into a network of parks.
Right. Which is now a destination
and
attraction.
Now it's a destination. Downtown's redevelopment, it was after several misfired attempts at bringing in others to help. It's basically a homegrown thing. I mean, they're local businesses that started, local entrepreneurs in Market Square and on Gay Street, and got a big boost from Regal opening the cinema. Regal happens to be a
it is a homegrown company.
It is a homegrown company.
It's not a home-owned company.
It's not a home-owned company. We were also still headquartered here.
Yep.
At least for now. But the stadium is, the the driving force is Randy Boyd, who is a Knoxville native business person, and he wants to bring baseball.
Born right across the river, as he likes to say.
Yeah, right across the river, and wanting to bring baseball back to his hometown. I mean, so these are all kind of homegrown things, and that's one of the things that the folks at the chamber talked about is when you do that, you build on what you have, and you encourage it, but we need more of it.
Right.
And anyway, we will let Mike Odom, who's the CEO of the chamber, discuss the report and more in our interview segment coming up next. Our guest this week is Mike Odom. He is the CEO of the Knoxville Chamber. And the chamber this week came out with a new report called Transitioning Knoxville's Economy for the Information or the Imagination Age. We asked Mike to come on and talk about that. And Mike, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, great. Well, listen, we'll kind of jump right in. The title mentions the imagination age. I wanted you to kind of tell us what the imagination age is and why you thought, or the chamber thought, that Knoxville has to transition its economy to meet its challenges.
Absolutely. So the imagination age is a name informally been given to the upcoming next industrial revolution. And, we're coming out of now the third industrial revolution, which deemed the digital age, and getting ready for that next one. And so it has been something on our minds as we've watched the trajectory of the economy, both locally, nationally, globally. And so we have spent a lot of time trying to get much more data oriented and data focused here at the chamber. And so we kept seeing a number of these different kind of metrics that were research was showing that, hey, things are good, but this impact is going to occur across the globe. And how is Knoxville prepared to start handling it? And that's what really was the precipice for us doing this work and saying, we're a little concerned that we're not prepared when we make that next step into that next industrial revolution, that in imagination age, and how can we prepare our community to do so?
Okay, so you guys came up with essentially 4 strategies to address this, and one of the things that struck me when looking at this is how, as you mentioned, our economy's good, and there aren't many ups and downs. It's very steady. But even these other cities that do have ups and downs that we don't have, and of course, our economy is kind of underpinned by ORNL and Y12 and UT and TVA, these big government institutions that keep us from falling through the floor in bad times. But these other cities really soar during good times, and we just kind of continue moving steadily ahead. And you've mentioned, or one of the strategies is to bring in high growth companies with the potential to really take off when the imagination age actually hits. So talk a little bit about what those companies are, what kind of industries you're talking about, and what the chamber anticipates being able to do to attract them to Knoxville.
Right. And so one clarification on that is those growth companies don't necessarily be ones that we recruit in. We have growth companies here. And since we launched our Path to Prosperity strategic vision about 2.5 years ago, we made a much larger commitment to focus on the businesses that are here before we focused on the ones that are in other places and try to bring them here. And so this work is definitely built upon that foundation. But to answer the bigger question is, these are companies that have the opportunity to where they're going to actually be able to scale and be able to succeed at a high rate within this next revolution industrial revolution that occurs. And so it's not a big secret. They're going to be in areas that are starting to really percolate in the economy related to information technology and engineering and the use of artificial intelligence and 3D printing and those kind of things. So, biotechnology, if COVID has done nothing else, it has shown us that as a country, we've got to be better from a biotech perspective. And so those are the areas that we really want to focus on. And when you look at the research that's being done here, the assets that we have, we really feel that we can take advantage of those in a much bigger way. You mentioned the big three. That's you're exactly right. We will never have what we call that rock bottom moment, and which is something we're very grateful for. But at the same time, the issue is if we sit and rely simply on those three, we're never going to have those highs either that we need to have or we deserve to have as a community.
And just to use an example, I'm guessing that Axle Logistics, to take one, might fit the model you're talking about. It's a relatively new company that's grown very quickly. They just announced a big expansion on Central Street, and they also kind of arise from, it was graduates from the University of Tennessee's supply chain program who are then actually staying here in the community. I mean, is that like a model for the kinds of things that you want to see more of?
Absolutely. So homegrown talent coming out of the university and being entrepreneurs. So being part of that innovative entrepreneurial ecosystem, and then creating a business that has the potential to, or already has the potential to continue to grow. Now, it's important to say a very healthy community needs what are typically deemed as lifestyle businesses. So like the dry cleaner or the restaurant or the flower shop, we have to have those. But those places succeed more when they're surrounded by these high growth companies that have the talent within them to use the services. They're buying more dry cleaning, or eating in the restaurant, or buying flowers more often. So it becomes much more robust as an ecosystem if we have the balance in both ways.
One of the things when you read through this report that kind of jumps out at you is one of the focuses is going to have to be on people, on the developing the workforce, the brain power that is going to be needed, people with the right skills, and attracting, not only building homegrown, but also attracting from other places, because we're going to have people moving here. And one of the concerns appears to be the 25 to 54-year-old demographic, which is that's the sweet spot. That's where people are buying homes. That's where people are raising families. They're growing their wealth and their discretionary spending money, things like that will help those flower shops and restaurants that you talk about. And we're falling behind on those compared to other cities. And so what kind of address what needs to happen with the workforce, and you can include the entrepreneurs too, because entrepreneurism is one of the big thrusts of this report as well.
So first of all, this 25, the dearth of our growth in our 25 to 54-year-olds is the most critical issue that we as the chamber feel for the community right now. We can't say this enough. We can't say this loud enough that it is at a critical point right now. And it's not just within Knox County, it is our surrounding communities as well, that they're having this issue, excuse me, in unison. So what has to happen is, let me give you, before I do that, let me give you a real world example. So we were meeting with the CEO, who's not, the company's not headquartered here, but has a very significant presence in this area. And we very bluntly said to them, we want more of your operations based here. So you've got operations in these other states. How do we get them here? And he was, straightforward as he could be. He says, here's our deal for our company. We are going to put the jobs where the talent is. You find the talent, we'll bring the jobs. And it wasn't a very clear and concise way to say that we've got to do a much better job of retaining that talent in that 25 to 54-year-old demographic, and then attracting as well. And starting with those who have left. I mean, we don't have to resell ourselves. We don't have to sell ourselves to people who don't know us. We can sell ourselves to people who have lived here before and bring them back. We can start to make a real impact on these numbers. But you mentioned the entrepreneurship. These folks are leaving and starting businesses in other places. Why aren't they starting it here? So what we want to do is, first and foremost, is we've got to get the alignment with our education institutions. So all the way in elementary through post-secondary, to say, okay, here's where the economy is going. We know where it is today. They do a great job of filling that gap, but where is it going to be tomorrow, and how do we start building those pipelines? Next is, we've got to have the ecosystem around in the entrepreneurial space to say, you have the act of capital. You have a very supportive group who will help you make connections and help you find the talent. And then three is, we've got to have that what we stole a term from Governor Bredesen of civic furniture. You've got to, when you're not working and you're looking for things to do, we've got to have that really a diverse set of civic furniture. And it doesn't have to necessarily be big things like the multi-purpose stadium. It could be more diverse offerings in restaurants. It could be, hey, what are we doing at Island Home Airport that makes it attractive for people who want to go spend the afternoon there? It could be a whole set of things. And we've got to be very intentional about trying to do that. And that's how we will keep that talent.
What are some communities that have, you mentioned civic furniture and that being a big key to bringing or retaining people, keeping them here. What are some other some things that are available in other cities that you guys have seen when you've been out and about doing your chamber things, and some examples of some really good civic furniture that maybe Knoxville's either lacking in or could do more to attract?
I don't know if there are specific examples, which we could do. I mean, we could go on for hours with that, and if we had this. It needs to be more of organically of what fits within Knoxville. When we talk about this, a lot of times people immediately go to Nashville, and that's where their mindset is. Well, we don't want the debauchery of whatever. Is it Broadway? I'm sorry, I've not spent a lot of time in Nashville, so I don't know. Well, we're not going to do that. It doesn't fit who we are as a community. But what can we do, in terms of nightlife? And what can we do if, I mentioned Island Home Airport. Greenville, South Carolina has done a great job with their general aviation airport and trying to make it really attractive for families and people of that and people like that to go. We're doing some of that with the urban wilderness and how we grow that and make it be a part of it. Now, look, I don't hike. I don't bike. The only time I'm going to do those things is if I'm being chased, but it's great to have it. And if you're a company who's trying to retain and attract talent, things are great. But I think specifics have to really come from the community itself.
I had a question about the focus on high growth companies, which obviously makes sense. I mean, those are the companies everybody wants to attract or retain or help develop. But there is also a tendency for high growth companies to grow up to a point where they become attractive for acquisition. And we've seen this happen with several of our best known local companies here over the past decade. And once that happens, then a lot of times sort of the commitment to the local area, is variable. It depends on that company's other interests and investments and so forth. So I guess
how do you try to make that a sustainable thing where you're building up companies that are then maybe actually going to be here, for 10, 20, 30 years and not, it's not like you can stop them from being bought, right?
No, and in some cases, we want that to happen. We want that investment in those communities. And I'm so glad you asked that, because I've been here about 3.5 years now, and that was a big question, because many of our larger employers had been acquired, or at least in part, by other entities outside of the community. And so it's a matter of scale. When you're reliant on 1, 2, or 3 of those companies, and as their business model, or what the families or whomever the ownership wants to do, then it's all of a sudden, it's like, wow, that's going to impact us. If you have 30 of those companies, it's less impactful when that happen. And if anything, maybe that acquisition happens within the community itself. So I think that just really reinforces why we've got to focus more on those, so that we can have that scale, which then less volatility for us and that impact. But it also brings up another point that we've talked about that we don't really address in this work is, it's key to have headquarters, because when, if a company does acquire another company, and look, there are no mergers, someone's acquiring someone else, we can call them if we want, but there's an acquisition in there. The headquarters is where those commitments to the community typically stay. So when it's, hey, we got to cut our budget, typically it's not going to happen as much with the headquarters as it is going to happen at the remote locations across the country or the globe. And so more of this has to be the headquarters here. And that's why it's so key for us to focus on the companies that are here already, because that's where the headquarters are. If you look, we're having a lot of discussions with different partners, and even in Nashville, a lot of their larger companies are not based there. The headquarters are in other countries or in other communities, and so it's going to impact them more. And so for us, it's not just about, hey, we want to get an expansion, another manufacturing facility to this plant. We want the headquarters, because that's not going to go away in the long term in terms of their commitment to the community. Sorry, I'm a little passionate about that idea.
Well, one other thing, this strategy is primarily kind of, this is what we as the chamber are going to focus on. We're going to focus on, developing and nurturing and recruiting high growth companies. We're going to focus on the improving the workforce, the talent level that's in the area. Chamber investors, as you call them, members. The rest of us call them members. You call them investors. They're going to play, of course, the biggest role in the, in much of the civic furniture that you're talking about, the restaurants and the nightlife and things like that. What role does the public sector play? The county government and city government. What roles would they have to play to help move this transition forward?
It's going to be in a multitude of areas, but not necessarily something that's going to be huge policy changes or something that you can put your finger on and say, okay, I get it. So one area is going to be in land use and land use policy and those kind of things, because we're going to need the infrastructure to do this, and ensuring whether it be in housing, that we can have the different diversified housing that talent wants. It could be in like, for instance, where our business parks are, and as I think you all know, we the chamber now oversee the management of the Industrial Development Board and the Development Corporation, and how we use those business parks. Maybe we've done that differently in the past, and that's going to be from the city and the county kind of weighing in. It's going to be in where they can make public investments. So we talked about urban wilderness. Obviously, they've made a huge commitment to the multi-purpose stadium, which is significant. So I think you're going to see it not necessarily in some big flashy ways, but in some small, little, subtle, anecdotal ways that 10 years from now, we're going to wake up and go, wait, how did that just happen? We're at that point now. Children and grandkids don't want to move to other cities. The business community is flourishing with these high growth companies, and we've got that civic furniture. I think that's what's going to happen.
All right. Well, that's probably a good place to leave it. So thanks very much again for joining us. And I'm sure we'll track this as it continues to evolve.
Well, we appreciate the opportunity to come on today, as well as what you all have done to promote the work.
Thanks, Mike. We'll
Thanks,
talk
guys.
to you again soon.
See you soon.
And thanks again to Mike Odom for joining us. We very much appreciate it. All right, now we are to the Q&A portion of the podcast. Every week we invite subscribers on our subscriber-only Facebook page, the Compass Colloquy. Even I have trouble pronouncing that sometimes. Colloquy.
Don't we all?
To just tell us anything that's on their mind, anything they'd like to hear a little bit more about on the podcast. And we got some suggestions, and one question was, is there any more to report on the McAlister's Deli situation? And there is a little bit more to report on that. Mm-hmm. People may remember we talked about this on last week's episode in detail, so we won't go back over all of it. Suffice to say, it had to do with an incident involving some sheriff's deputies saying that they were refused service at a McAlister's Deli location on Shad Road. It turned out the 15-year-old cashier, who either, according to them, wouldn't serve them, or according to her, was just walking away because of the end of her shift, and she asked a coworker to take their order. Anyway, she, first of all, turned out to be the younger sister of Anthony Thompson Jr., the young man who was killed in an encounter with police in Austin East High School bathroom last year. And secondly, she was fired after all of this and the kind of social media storm that it kicked up. And all of this, of course, was only brought to public attention because the sheriff's office opted to bring it to public attention. The deputies let their communications director know, and she went on Facebook and posted about it. So a couple of things happened this week. One thing that came out, the News Sentinel had a good story on it where they went and interviewed the girl herself, and also another cashier who was working there at the time, who was the cashier who came up to take the officer's order after the other girl had walked away. And they both said, first of all, nobody was ever denied service. Nobody ever said, we're not going to serve you. The girl walked away and just said to their cashier, can you take this? I have a couple of other things to do. The other cashier walked up, and she said that the officers at that point were bothered that the other girl hadn't served them, and they started asking questions. Why wouldn't she serve us? Does she not like police officers? And then they opted to leave without ordering. Seemed like it was a better description of what happened than that they were denied service because they felt, disrespected or whatever. So the News Sentinel story said that, in fact, the girl was fired, but she was not fired because of anything that happened in that interaction. In the course of this all being brought to the attention of the local franchise owner and all of us reporting on it, where we kept saying that it was a 15-year-old girl, the franchise owner said, well, we're not supposed to be employing 15-year-olds anyway. And that was the reason they gave the girl for firing her. Now, she says when she filled out her job application, she was 100% honest about her age, and she also knew of other 15-year-olds working there.
Yeah. And she got in a birth certificate.
And nobody made an issue of it. Nevertheless, that was the reason that they gave. So she wasn't fired because there was some finding that she had somehow done something wrong with the police officers, and McAlister's apparently told her, we'd be happy to have you apply again when you are 16. And then the other thing that happened this past week was County Commissioner Daisha Lundy, who represents the 1st District, which covers most of East Knoxville, as well as Mechanicsville, Lonsdale, and really the majority of the city's black population. And she is the only black representative on County Commission. She put out a fairly long statement saying that this entire episode had really bothered her. And of course, she's a county commissioner. The sheriff's office is a county department, county office that is funded by county commission. And she didn't go into a lot of details about what she thought should have happened, but she was very clear that she thought the situation was handled badly, should have been handled differently. And she also said that in her couple of years on county commission now, she really sees a need for county government, county departments to be more aware and sort of careful, maybe is the word, or caretaking in their relations with, she said, the black-brown communities of Knox County, and that she sees a real need there. And then she kind of ended with a plea for, when disagreements come up, instead of turning them into sort of giant social media conflagrations, can we use them to try to come together and understand each other better? She didn't make any specific demands, but she did encourage people who had concerns about any of this to come to County Commission's meeting on December 19th and speak at public forum about it. So we may hear, in fact, I'll be kind of surprised if we don't hear some more public feedback and discussion of that there. And I don't know that there's a whole lot more to this particular story. The girl is obviously not working at McAlister's now. The sheriff's office has not had anything more to say about it since their early statements about it. But that was the little bit of continued fallout from this.
Yeah, the one thing that was has been kind of interesting, kind of looking at it from a detached perspective, is that everybody ended up getting attacked in this. Mm-hmm. When the sheriff's office first put out their statements, people went on social media attacking McAlister's for being anti-police,
right? For not backing the blue.
And then when it turned out that the 15-year-old girl was Anthony Thompson Jr.'s sister, and that she had been fired, the firestorm came from the more progressive side, the people who aren't necessarily enamored of police forces in general, and about and talk about, and so I mean everybody, that's one of the things about social media taking over these things, is that a lot of fighting and information and misinformation that would otherwise be handled in the store, for instance, in this instance, gets out there in the world and causes a lot of ripples and implications throughout the community.
Yeah, and I think that was part of what Commissioner Lundy was talking about in terms of how these things could be handled, that immediately going on social media and posting about things publicly, especially if you don't actually have all the information in hand, is probably not the best way to address a topic of concern like this. I think was some of what she was getting at was, when things do come up, let's not use them as opportunities to stir up one base or another against one person or entity or whatever or another. Let's take our time to have conversations and kind of find out what the situation is and look for ways to talk to each other and so forth. Yeah, I think that was very much part of what she was talking about. Yeah. Okay, so looking forward to the coming week, we do have a couple of things coming up. The school board will hold its monthly meetings. They have their work session on Monday at 5 p.m., their monthly voting meeting on Wednesday at 5 p.m., both of those in the Summer Place boardroom. A couple of things on the agenda. They're going to talk about their legislative agenda. We were just talking about the upcoming legislative session. And all of our local governments ahead of each legislative session always kind of have their own agenda of priorities that they would like for the legislature to consider or address in one way or another. So the school board will be talking about that, including the issue that we talked about last month of the retention requirement for third grade students who don't score sufficiently high on the ELA, English Language Arts test. That's one of the things that they'll talk about as part of their legislative agenda. Also, a new mental health contract with the McNabb Center, which we will probably talk about some more on the show next week after there's been discussion at the school board, but an effort to provide expanded mental health services in county schools, which is something that people both in and outside of the school system have talked about as a need for quite some time. And so then on Thursday, the Planning Commission meets.
The Planning Commission will indeed meet on Thursday. Their preliminary agenda is out. One of the big items they'll be considering is the Belltown development, which we've talked about before and reported on, which is basically a brand new small town that that a developer wants to put in, build. It's about 5 miles west of Clinton Highway, on Emory Road, kind of near when you're getting closer to Carnes. It's a 300-acre development, more than 1,000 residences of various types, apartments, townhouses, houses on small, with smaller lots, houses with bigger lots, the whole 9 yards, plus a commercial center, plus a park along Beaver Creek. And so, and that park would be open to the general public, not just for area residents. It's it's the first big development to come in, or to be, go through the plan development process for Knox County, and that basically plan development allows you for more creative development in exchange for public amenities. One of those being the park, that is the driving force there. As almost always happens, large developments get some pushback from people in rural areas, particularly get pushback from area residents. This also is going to create a huge traffic issue. They all acknowledge that. So like I said, it's over 1,000 residences plus commercial node, and the traffic. They've done a traffic study now. Traffic is going to more than double along that stretch of Emory Road, which, by the way, right now is 2 lanes.
Right.
And that's it. And so the traffic study that was done said that the volume of traffic would support a 5-lane road, a 4-lane road with a turn lane. That's not what they're at. They're saying they're going to be doing. The recommendation right now.
That would be pretty expensive to build.
Yes,
I'm guessing.
And TDOT would have to be heavily involved in this. But what they're going to be doing now is a 2-lane road with a turn lane in the middle, and right turn lanes on the sides. There are going to be 2 side streets that are not there now that would service the development. One of them would have a traffic light, which with that volume of traffic you would need. And they're also talking about doing improvements all the way to Clinton Highway. So that would be the road work involved in this would be major.
And that is a state road, right?
That is a state road, so TDOT would have to be heavily involved in all this. The park that would be the public amenity in there, Legacy Parks Foundation has said they're interested in working with the developer on that. They're not going so far as say they're endorsing it, and they're not committing themselves to doing anything, but they're interested in doing that. But like I said, it's a huge development. It is. I mean, if you guess that each dwelling unit would have an average of 3 people, then I mean you've got 3,000 people.
Right, like you said. I mean, that is the size of some of our small towns around here.
That is the size of a small town. So, so it'll be interesting to see, and kind of what the reaction is now that the Planning Commission will actually vote on it. They've already met once to talk about it in this plan development process. You take a kind of your concept plan to the Planning Commission, and they talk about it. They don't vote on it. They just talk about it, give you ideas, objections, those kinds of things. You take it back, you develop an actual plan, and bring it back to them. And that's what this is. And if they approve it, it's in.
Right.
No, it goes to. I'm sorry. It
goes to county
It does go to
commission.
county commission
Right.
for their approval. If they reject it, it's rejected. Period. Unless the developer appeals planning to county commission.
Mm-hmm.
But this is it. This is the plan. Not really. I'm assuming that you could reject it and it gets redone, but I mean it's not. This is their shot at getting it done.
Right. Well, should be interesting conversation, and I bet we're going to talk about that next week too, to hear what happened at Planning Commission. All right. Well, I think that wraps us up for this week. Thanks again to Lord Seth Barber for the production assistance. Our theme music is by William Wright. And ho, 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 everybody.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.